Last time we got through 3 of the questions, aspect of the questions of chapter 30. I went ahead and went to the latter part of 31 to show that what happens in verses 18 following is kind of the same thing of Job putting God on trial. God has not been fair. It's kind of when I think he crosses the line. This is the last of his speaking as well, as we see at the end of chapter 31. But just to remind ourselves, the first 8 verses, you see someone that's being discredited by his enemies, and he said their fathers are more disgusting than I am. Their fathers, and here's the sons of the fathers, your fathers I wouldn't put with my sheepdogs. I wouldn't let them work with my sheepdogs. So it shows you the pain, and he said, well, I don't like you, Job. What he's showing the pain that I'm being trashed by the people whose fathers are no count in my life. And yet, that's happening to me. That's the reality of that. Verses 9, we see beginning with verses 9 through 15, you begin to realize that the present contemptuous attitude that people have toward him. And I want you to see the pronouns. How do you look at this? Verse 9 says, and now I am before thee, and now I am become their song. Yea, I am a byword unto them. They abhor me, they stand aloof from me, they spare not to spit in my face. Now notice the pronoun. For he hath loosed his cord and afflicted me, and they have cast off the bridle before me. And then he starts talking about the rabble. Who is the he there? Loose the cord. We talk about that. Could be a tent cord. It could be an arrow with the cord of an arrow that is set forth for I'm able to protect myself from my enemies, or my enemies are able to shoot an arrow at me. That's the interesting thing. They cast off the bridle. That which was restraining them is set aside. So he and they, and this is where you begin to realize he's putting God on trial. He hath loosed his cord and afflicted me. God, I'm putting it on you. And there's truth to that. There's nothing that happens that God does not allow. He can stop it all. So that's true. And so he's behind it, and they have cast off their bridle. There's no restraint of the devastation they're bringing to my life. And I become their song. And then upon the right hand rise the rabble. They cast off the rabble, they're not even deserving of being respected at all. They thrust aside my feet. They cast up against me their waves of destruction. They mar my path. God is allowing this to happen, and you have done that. And the Bible it's not embarrassed to say that. We sometimes are. Well, he allowed it. He did, but he willed it. Not that he willed evil to happen, but he willed that this event's going to happen, and Job's going to have to experience it. And that drives us to trusting God. That's the point that we get, I think we should get out of Job and in our lives. Because God wouldn't do me any harm. Yeah, he's allowing me to go through this harm, but in a sense, he has a will behind it. It's going to have an effect out here. Will I trust him and make me stronger? Will I denounce him and die like his wife wanted to do because God's not right? God's just been cruel to him, and he'll say that in this section. But there's a sense of I'm disgusting before people that I abhor. So, who cares? But I become their byword, and God, you allowed them, you unleashed them upon me. And so we pick up at verse 15. Terrors are turned upon me. They chase mine honor as the wind. Get this picture. They chase it as the wind, and my welfare is passed away as a cloud. Imagery there is that I'm just nothing anymore. Dishonor's gone. So that's the contemptuous present that's happening in his life. And God is indeed, I think that's the big pronoun he. I think he and they. That's what we're picking up, and sometimes we don't get that. In verses 16 following, we began to see the destruction that affliction that he's experiencing. Now my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have taken hold upon me. The night season, my bones are pierced, or are cut away from me, in the sense that they're falling off me, away from me. They are pierced in me. And he says, and it says, and the pains, they gnaw me, they take no rest. By God's great force is my garment, disfigured. What's his garment? His skin. He's now become almost nothing. His skin is my garment, is disfigured. It bindeth me about like a loose collar. A loose collar is a way that it's on me. Doesn't fit. I'm disfigured. He hath cast me in the mire. That's why that he back there, I missed that. I said, well, I'll pick it up. No, I'll pick it up here. But he's been hitting at this, and now he's looking at, here's the pain. Here's the contentious attitude that you've allowed to have against me. They chase me, my honor, out like a wind. This is how I feel, God. This is how I feel. I cry unto thee, and thou dost not answer me. I stand up, and thou gazest at me. You see me. You see how my skin is not fitting anymore. My body, it says that thou art turned to be cruel to me. Those aren't his enemies. This is God. It's they're enemies. But with thy might of thy hand, thou persecutest me. You're persecuting me, God. And thou liftest me up to the wind, and causes me to ride upon it, and thou dissolvest me in the storm. I think we got a pretty good vivid picture of what that looks like, don't we? Or feel like. And for I know that thou wilt bring me to death, and to the house appointed for all living. I'm going to die, just like the wicked. And there's no sense of justice. Job is having his moment where he is the calamity and the destruction of his family, all that's coming upon him, and this is how he feels about it. And that's why I switched over to the latter part, in the latter part of our lesson. He's ready to sign the proposition and put his signature upon that to be before God. Let's get the judgment out. And we'll hit that as we go through 31. But the fourth thing is one of interpretation. I'm interested to see those of you who have a New American Standard, have the American Standard. Those of you who have the New King James, you're going to have a total different verse. And I'm interested how say we've got a problem. Either howbeit does not one stretch out his hand in his fall, that's the American Standard. You're going to either say, well, that's God, or it's the one that's falling. Job. So with those thoughts in mind, how would it be, those of you with the New King James, how would you interpret that? So that's God. What is God? What would he not do? In verse 24. How does your Bible read? Anybody got a New King James? Your kids do. So how does that read? Okay. Or is a heap of ruins. Surely he wouldn't stretch out his hand to them. Or in his calamity, therefore, cry for help, that he's trying to help the people in calamity. Remember, he turns his back upon the wicked. You see that in Proverbs. He laughs at them in the day of their calamity. A picture that when he's bringing judgment, he's going to bring the judgment. So how but does God surely wouldn't stretch out his hand and with something that's already ruined and bringing his judgment upon them. That's the New King James. But the New American Standard, and I'm just reading for the American Standard because they're pretty close. Howbeit doth not one stretch out his hand in his fall? When you are about to fall, would you stretch out your hand to break your fall? Would you do that? Yeah. Or in his calamity, therefore cry for help? I'm fallen. Help me. Would that be something that might happen? And then verse 25, I even weep for the people that need help. Did I not weep for him that was in trouble? Was not my soul grieved for the needy? But yet, when I look for good, I'm falling, I need help. But when I look for good, then evil came, and when I waited for light, there came darkness. I think that fits in its context. That's why I wouldn't think New King James has the thought right. But New King James is a great translation. But there's times when even the American Standard, I think, doesn't rise to where it ought to be, especially 2 Timothy 3:16. All Scripture, given by inspiration of God, is profitable for doctrine. So all Scripture that is given by inspiration of God, but how does your Bible read? All Scripture is given by inspiration of God. That's the point. So sometimes a context helps you. Yeah, it's true. God laughs at the people's calamity. He doesn't want people to be lost, but in times of his judgment, there's not any mercy coming. It's just judgments coming upon them. That's going to happen. Surely he wouldn't reach out his hand to those he's already judging. And that's the way some interpret that, because Job is kind of giving up. He's kind of saying that's the way God is. But I think he's describing himself, that I reached out, and I reached out to you, God, and wouldn't someone reach out when they're falling? I think that fits. And yet I sympathize with people who were in trouble, and yet when I look for light, there's only darkness. Nobody to help me. I think that's the mood Job is in. And that's what he's going through. My heart is troubled, verse 27, and resteth not. Days of afflictions are upon me. I'm mourning without the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. Say, I'm fallen, help me. I cry for help, but I'm like with the animals that are out in the wilderness. I am brother to the jackals and a companion to ostriches. My skin is black and falleth from me. Remember, that skin is a garment that's like a loose collar, darkened, diseased. My bones are burned with heat, in verse 30. Therefore is my harp turned to mourning, and my pipe under the voice of them that weep. That's why another thing we'll see in the Psalms, that when the harp was played, there was joy. That's why Revelation speaks about they hung their harp up. There's no joy as they're going through things. Not that God wants instrumental music to be played in worship. It has the Bible looks about, I hung them up at the trees of Babylon. I went into Babylon where there's no joy. And the harp was connected with joy. He said, well, his joy is gone. His joy is gone. So I'm being derided by people I have no respect for. They show contempt with me, and they deride me. I'm feeling they feel like what that's like. And he kind of, God, I think you're being cruel to me. I think you're punishing me, and he realizes I haven't done any sin. That's the dilemma. He hasn't. But this comes upon him. So that's how I look at chapter 30, and a little interpretation you have to do. I mean, you take that New King James and it tells the truth. But I think in this context it fits with someone fallen and nobody's helping them. We naturally will fall. We'll try to brace ourselves, and that's kind of what happens. Anything you want to add to that? All right. What is Job's effective way to keep himself from sexual misconduct? It's changed the scene a little bit. Because we're going to 31, he's going to now set forth his righteousness in this chapter as it comes to a close. So what does he say that indeed would be an effective way to live your life as a young man and grow older from sexual misconduct? Guard what you look like. I made a covenant with my eyes. What's that covenant? I promise with my eyes that I'll not look upon a virgin. That's a young, unmarried woman in this context, in the Hebrew. a young unmarried woman, and especially one of youth, that this, I think he's starting from his youth, what kind of a person he is, to look upon her, and I think that look is to be of lust. What do we see in Matthew 5:28? Look not upon a woman to lust after her in your heart, because you committed adultery already with her in your heart. Don't do that. So you make a covenant with your eyes. Now, how's that for making a resolution for a new year? That don't work. But what does it do when you write it down? What does it do when you express it? He said, this is going to govern my life. I think there's some good in doing that. And Job is confident, and he'll defend himself. But that becomes a very good way, because what happens, God will surely punish when we sin against him. For what is the portion from God above? So when you think of this verse, and you didn't read the rest of the verse, for what is his portion from God and the heritage from the Almighty on high? If you don't lust after a woman, you're going to go to heaven. Your inheritance is heaven. Well, that's good. That's one thing, because adultery and all that will keep you out of heaven. But what does he follow up with? What is your portion, and what is the heritage from the Almighty? Under what context? If I fail, is it not calamity to the unrighteous, the heritage of Jehovah, and disaster to the workers of iniquity? He ain't talking about heaven. But inheritance always heaven. It's a positive thing. Well, this is a positive thing, because we know he will judge unrighteousness. Calamity to the unrighteous. It's a disaster to the workers of iniquity. I better keep this covenant that I'm making with God. I just think it's interesting when we read our Bibles, we get a rounded, balanced part. I got some of it that says, well, that sounds like you talk about inheritance, the heritage of God. I'm God's people, and I'm going to be saved. No, there's a good thing to hear. Righteous Job, he knew the other side of that. Maybe it's easy when he feels like God's against him, but he says, I'm recognizing this is part of it. And doth not he see my ways? How deep does he see his ways? How strongly does he see it? Just kind of a glance? What does he say? I know your steps. I've numbered them. That's just doubling down. He sees my ways. Oh, that's very general. You took 10 steps. That's very specific. That's Hebrew poetry. It gets a balance to the thought. And it's something that's, to me, is beautiful. That I can see, how would I look at that? He knows me inside out. He knows me very distinctly. I cannot hide even my steps from him. If I've walked with falsehood and my foot hath hasted to deceit, let me be weighed in an even balance. Justice come upon me, that God may know mine integrity. If myself have turned out of the way and my heart walked after my own eyes and so forth. And if any spot hath cleaved to my hands, then let me sow and let another eat. So you take away my possessions. You take away the fruit of my labor. I'm sowing, but I'm not going to partake of it, just like they did when God brings judgment upon the nations. Yea, and let the produce of my field be rooted out. So here he begins to set forth what happens when I live an unrighteous life, and therefore what's going to happen to me. Well, in these verses, we begin to look at the answer for the next is just not sexual conduct, but how does he keep his mind to make sure, what did Job keep in mind when he makes sure he's treated all justly? He's going to treat people justly. And so what he said, if I've walked in falsehood and my foot has hasted to deceit, I'll be judged. And don't lean on the scales just because you like me, God. Let it be balanced. God's just. He understands that. I've turned out of the way, and my heart walked after mine eyes, and I gave into my sight, and I lusted, and my hands are full of sin and so forth. Let me meet the judgment. verse 8 that we're observing that. So what do we see in verses 9 through 15? If my heart hath been enticed to a woman, and I've laid wait at my neighbor's door, let somebody have my wife. That's what he begins to talk about. Because that's what the judges do in verse 11. For there were a heinous crime, yea, it were for iniquity to be punished by the judges. For it is a fire that consumeth unto destruction, and would root out all of mine increase. If I do this, I know God's judgment will be here. That's why I'm going to treat people justly. I'm not going to lust after my neighbor's wife. Punishment will come upon me, and deservingly so. If I have despised the cause of my manservant or maidservant, let's see how he treats his hired help. When they contended with me, what then shall I do when God riseth up, and when he visiteth, what shall I answer him? Did not he that made me in the womb make him? And did not one fashion us in the womb? They're just like me. I will treat them equally. That's the way he lived his life. And he knows God will judge justly. So it's good to know these things. God judges me in a balanced judgment. There's a sense of would you want to receive from your neighbor that which you do to them? He brings that. God's going to destroy from the root of the cause of those things. Destroyed by fire. Judgment is coming. And rightly so. Remember Paul says in Romans the 2nd chapter that we await the righteous judgment of God. The righteous judgment. We know that judgment is righteous. That comforts me when I preach a funeral for people who commit suicide. Not a thing I can do to add to what's happened. Not a thing I can do is, well, he was justified. I don't know. But what do I know? God's judgment is just. What was the state of mind at that moment? I don't know when he pulled the trigger. I don't know what led up to that. I don't know a lot of things. But I know God's just. And there's no other higher court that I can go, and there's no other court that could be more just than God our Creator. I leave it in his hands. But I know it's wrong to take your life. I can talk to the living. But there's times in my life, and maybe it's because I was close to him, I said, I hope you saw something we can't see, because it looks horrible right now. But I can trust that. And I also can trust God will be just and the balance, and we're knowing how he'll look at things. So I've got from my hired help to my love life and my family and all those things that I do in my life, I'll have to give an answer for that, what I've done in the body, what you have done. Job knew that. And I think he's setting forth, this is why I treat people justly. And that's been the accusation against his friends. You didn't help the poor. You've treated people badly. And he hadn't forgot about it. And he just brings it up to their attention, and at the end, he's ready to sign papers. You want to go to God's judgment with me? I'll put my name on the line. You put your name on the line. We'll take it to God. I'll wear it like a crown. I'm ready to go. And I think that's a man that knows he's right before God, and that he can't figure out how come his skin looks like a deteriorated black coat around it doesn't fit his body anymore. Well, Job was a rich man, and he was. This time those things have been taken from him. What two things did he not do that sometimes characterize the rich? He's justifying himself. But what two things do you see in this chapter? And beginning verse 16, if I withheld the poor from their desire, have caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or have eaten my morsel alone, the fathers have not eaten thereof. Nay, from my youth grew up with me as a father. All these things, let the judgment come upon them. So now let's switch. What do you see in verses, beginning with verse 24? Well, not even, well before that. I don't want to answer the question for you. What two things do you see that rich men do that he's not going to do? All right. And that's what is verse 16. Well, no, that begins, that verse 24. What do you see in verse 16? Okay, and he's a miser. He keeps the money to himself, right? He wants to keep his money. And if I got to give it to the poor, I don't have it. If I withheld the poor from their desire, or eaten my morsel alone, he just likes to see and count his money. If I've seen any perish for want of clothing or that of needy, if the loins have not blessed me, if I've not been warned with the fleece of my sheep, I've lifted up my hand against the fathers because I saw my help in the gate. He said, then let my shoulder fall off from the shoulder blade and my arm be broken from the bone. The calamity of God is a terror to me. And the reason of this majesty, I can do nothing. Here he is. I could help the poor. I think I'm implying that's behind the scenes. But what happens when I don't help the poor? I don't help anybody. I want to keep my money to myself. And Ecclesiastes chapter 5, he speaks about money. You're not satisfied with riches. If you want to be rich, you're not going to be satisfied with riches. And the problem in Ecclesiastes 5 is not that you're spending the riches on yourself, is that you just collected money. That's why I think that is a great passage for you wives. When Ecclesiastes 5 talks about money and riches, we can't take it with us, and we don't want to be a miser, so I'm going to go spend it this weekend. That'd be your passage. Context. He's after the person that just counts his money, and he doesn't use it to help his family. He doesn't use it here to help the people in need. But he's got it. And then, rightly to your point, verses 24, if I've made what my hope? That's the money. That's what rich men do. Paul argues that in 1 Timothy 6. If I've said to the fine gold, thou art my confidence. See, what gives you confidence? Because I got money. If I have rejoiced because of my wealth was great, and because my hand had gotten much, if I beheld the sun when it shined, or the moon walking in brightness, like you're that high that you can see all that as it stars, and my heart hath been listen to this, and my heart hath been secretly enticed, and my mouth had kissed my hand. What's that about? Who is he worshiping? What? Rich man. That's how great he thinks he is. And that's the way rich people are. They're above everybody else. You obey the laws we give, and we don't have to obey them. And rich people feel like they're elite. They're higher and better than everybody else. And they act like it. And this is a beautiful picture, because one of the words for worship God in the psalm, kiss toward the sun, S-U-S-O-N, Son of God, that's worship. We're kissing toward God. Who's he kissing here? My hand. I'm somebody great. That's what rich people do, and rich people sometimes they don't take care of other people. They keep their money, and they're not going to be that agreeable to share it with others as well. Any comments on that? Okay. Question 3, how does Job defend himself against the accusation that he's a hypocrite? You're not going to find that word there, but it's the concept we're looking at. And I picked these out when I saw the parenthetical statements. And of course my Bible will put a what? And you have you put a parenthesis, parenthetical. So I'm picking up verse 29 and 30. 29, I have rejoiced, if I have rejoiced at the destruction of him that hated me, or lifted up myself when evil found him. I'm not going to rejoice in the calamity of my neighbor. That's a rule lives by. Verse 30, yea, if I have not suffered my mouth to sin by asking his life with a curse, like I haven't even said I want him to die and then bring a curse upon him even though he's going to die. It's not much of a calamity. He's going to die, and I'll curse him right on down his grave. He said, yeah, if I went to that extent, that's not me. He doesn't do that. Verse 31 and 32, if the men of my tent have not said, who can find one that hath not been filled with this meat? If people around me, the closest to me in my tent, can point out somebody that I haven't helped? He said, no, you would never find one. The negative is there. Who can find one that has not been filled with this meat? If the men of my tent have not said that, you have some. But the sojourner hath not lodged in the street, but I have opened my doors to the traveler. I've gone beyond that. And yet you've accused me of not even helping the poor. Thank you. If, like Adam, I've covered my transgressions. Is he talking about Adam from the beginning? If so, how did Adam try to cover his transgressions? Well, could that be and hide my iniquity in my bosom? I'll just blame it on the woman that lies in my bosom. I don't believe that's the case, but you can make a case like that. They were trying to hide from God. And he said, I don't even hide it within my own thoughts. I'm not bringing Eve in here. But that's how he tried to escape the responsibility. Dave, that's exactly right when he did that. But he said, I don't do that. I will not even keep them inside my heart. Because I feared the great multitude, and the contempt of the families terrified me, so I kept silence and went not out the door. I just stayed in my house because I didn't want to meet and stand up for what's right. I don't do that. I'm not a hypocrite. I'm not a hypocrite. So we come to the end, and here's the final things he says. I want to read together. Oh, that I had one to hear me. Says, lo, here's my signature. Let the Almighty answer me. Is he putting God on the spot? Or he thinks he is. And that I had the indictment which mine adversary hath written. Here's what they've said against me, God. You're almighty. I know that because I'm feeling what you've done to me. I'm here. I put my signature. I'm ready to meet you. Verse 37, I would declare unto him the number of my steps. I already know he knows them. I would declare, these are the steps I took. These little detailed steps he did, even with helping others and so forth. And a prince would I go near unto him. As a prince, I would go near unto him as of royalty. Full of confidence. That's how he's ready to meet his God. He's not just crawling up to him and saying, God, I don't know. He kept his integrity all of his life. And sometimes if I don't study Job, sometimes I think he just destroyed man. Because a lot of times he is destroyed. But not deep down. That's the problem. And Elihu is going to pick up on that. That said, these men have not answered Job's problem. And then he says, land. So I'm ready to stand before God, and I'm ready to face the judgment with him confidently. But if my land goes against me, he possessed lands. If it goes against me, and here's how and the furrows thereof wheat together. That little furrow crying out, this is horrible, Job. He owns this land. It's horrible. If I've eaten the fruits thereof without money, I didn't pay for what I ate, or I've caused the owners thereof to lose their life or livelihood. Let weeds. Let thistles grow instead of wheat, and cockle, which was very bitter, instead of barley. The words of Job are ended. And again, there's his integrity before God. Of course, God is going to bring out some truth to him that not why this happened in his life, but to trust God. And that's going to be as we come to the close of that. Any questions on that? We went off. I was going to look at the next lesson, but does anybody have any questions on that? 2 minutes, it's okay. We'll save it. Thank you. Anybody have anything you want to add to Job? You've ended his talk with the friends, so-called friends. What is your feelings about Job that you've learned? Yeah, Peter.
Well, I think he is a man of integrity.
I think so too, and that's his dilemma. You know, I don't know. He was a righteous man before God, and God saw him that way. But inside, he knew he was too, and he didn't find many men that superior to that. The men that were complaining said, I have no respect for them. They're rabble. I wouldn't put them with my sheepdog. And that's always interesting to me. I didn't know they had sheepdogs back then. They've always had them, hadn't they? And even in the days of Job. Who Elihu, could you tell me who his descendants are real quick before we stop? Elihu, the son of Barkel the Buzzite, so Buzz, of the family of Ram. So Elihu was of the family of Abraham and David. From Elihu would become the descendant. Nahor was Abraham's brother. He was connected with him, and just look at the details that you'll trace it with Abraham. And you go to Matthew 1:4, you'll see Ram, and you go to Benadab, and the line from Abraham to David. That's Elihu, and we're going to hear it says these guys haven't got it, but I do, and he'll present his opinion, and we'll talk about that next time. Thank you.